The rain hadn't stopped when Cassian Valeo saw her, bound, bloodied, and left as bait under the orange haze of a dying street lamp. Her wrists were raw, her breath shallow, her eyes barely open. One look, and he knew this wasn't random. This was a message, a challenge. Someone had dared to spill blood on his streets. He tore the rope loose, his voice low enough to make the storm hold its breath. "Who did this to you?" She tried to speak, just one name, but before the word left her lips, he already knew what it meant. Someone wanted war, and by the time the sun rose over New York, Cassian Valeo was going to make the whole city bleed for it. The story doesn't end here. Subscribe to Mafia Soul to see what happened next, and drop a comment telling us where you're watching. Every view keeps these stories alive. Cassian Valeo had seen death before. He'd caused enough of it to know what silence really meant in New York's back alleys. But finding her there, tied and bleeding under the orange haze of a flickering street lamp, froze something inside him. Her shirt was soaked through, clinging to her ribs. Rope cut deep into her wrists. Blood matted her dark hair against her cheek. And when her eyes opened, dazed, terrified, they met his like a plea she didn't have breath left to make. "Who did this to you?" he whispered. His voice was rough, all gravel and thunder. Not gentle, not merciful. It was a vow, because on his streets, no one bled without paying a price. She tried to speak, lips trembling, but only a broken sound escaped, and before she could say more, her head slumped forward against his chest. Cassian caught her easily, the way someone catches a falling glass. Instinct first, understanding later. He didn't know her name yet. He didn't know that the woman he was holding, her pulse weak, her camera bag missing, her breath shallow, was the journalist who'd been following his trail for months. All he knew was that someone had touched what was his city, and someone was going to burn for it. Hours earlier, Helen Joshua had been chasing stories for 5 years, but none like this one. New York's underground had veins that pulsed money, secrets, and blood, and lately, they'd been running hotter. Gun shipments moving through abandoned piers. Foreign muscle showing up in boroughs that used to be quiet. Cops looking the other way. Every whisper traced back to one man. Cassian Valeo, the invisible king of the city's shadows. The problem was, no one had ever photographed him. That was what tonight was for. Helen adjusted her messenger bag, the camera inside balanced against her hip. The docks at Red Hook stretched before her, a maze of stacked containers and rusted cranes, everything washed in that dim sodium light that made the night feel sepia and endless. The air smelled of salt and diesel. She'd parked 3 blocks away, dressed to blend in, black jeans, a gray hoodie, hair tucked under a cap. Her press badge wouldn't save her here if someone caught her snooping. She'd done her homework. She knew the shift changes, the patrol routes, the blind corners where security cameras were dead. She'd even memorized the patterns of the harbor lights, when they blinked, when they didn't. Helen wasn't fearless, just stubborn. She crouched behind a stack of crates marked with Cyrillic letters, lifted her camera, and checked her settings. Low light, no flash, silent shutter. Somewhere beyond the containers, she heard male voices. Foreign, rough, Russian maybe, like the rumors said. Her heartbeat quickened. She moved closer, staying low, every step echoing in her bones. She found the gap between 2 cargo towers and leaned just enough to see. 4 men stood in a wide pool of light. 3 were armed, the glint of gunmetal clear even from her distance. The 4th knelt between them, hands bound behind his back, blood dripping down his jaw. Helen's journalist instincts warred with common sense. She should have left. Instead, she raised her camera and pressed the shutter. The soft click was a whisper, but in the night, it might as well have been thunder. One of the men turned. Their eyes met, cold blue to hazel brown, and the world seemed to stop breathing. Then came a shout, then the gunfire. Helen ran. Her sneakers pounded against wet concrete, her camera slamming against her chest. Behind her, boots thundered in pursuit, voices breaking through the rain in words she couldn't understand. She darted between container stacks, lungs burning, trying to remember which way she'd come in. She was close to the exit, close, when a hand clamped around her shoulder and yanked her backward. Pain exploded across her ribs as she hit the ground. Her camera went skidding across the pavement. Another hand gripped her hair, forcing her to look up into a scarred face. A man built like a wall, a cruel smile cutting through his features. "American," he said, his accent thick. "You take pictures?" Helen shook her head, but it was too late. He hit her. Hard. Blood filled her mouth. She tasted iron, fear, rain. "You see too much," he said, almost casually. "We make example." They tied her wrists with coarse rope, dragging her deeper into the maze of docks until the sound of the river drowned her cries. Her phone, her wallet, her camera gone. Someone kicked her stomach when she tried to plead. And when her vision blurred, when the rain became a steady roar in her ears, she heard one final sentence before everything went dark. Let Valeo find her. That name, Valeo. She didn't know what it meant. But whoever he was, they wanted him to see what they'd done. When Helen opened her eyes again, the world had changed. The rain had stopped. The alley was empty except for one shadow moving toward her, tall, dark, deliberate. And when the man knelt beside her, the leather of his jacket creaking, his hand cupping her jaw with unexpected gentleness, she realized this wasn't rescue. It was the beginning of something far more dangerous. "Who did this to you?" he whispered again. But this time, she understood what the question really meant. Someone was about to die for her. Rain slicked the alley to glass, washing thin rivers of red toward the gutter. Cassian Valeo crouched beside the unconscious woman, his breath a steady rhythm against the chaos building inside him. He'd seen bodies dumped before, men he'd ordered, men he hadn't. But this was different. This wasn't random. This was a message. He slipped off his leather jacket and draped it over her shoulders, careful of the rope burns that ringed her wrists. The fibers were coarse, industrial. Dock rope. He didn't need to see the knots to know which part of the city it had come from. "Marco," he said into the small, calm piece tucked under his collar. Static answered first, then the calm voice of his driver. "On you, boss. Bring the car. Quiet. And call Trent. No sirens." "She's alive, but barely." Cassian's gaze drifted to the mouth of the alley. 2 blocks away, a truck engine coughed to life and rolled off toward the river. A faint echo of laughter carried on the wind. Men sure they'd done enough damage to stay alive until morning. They were wrong. He pressed his palm against the concrete, feeling the lingering warmth of tire tracks. Same pattern he'd seen 2 weeks ago at Pier 12. His jaw tightened. The Corvin Syndicate had gotten bold if they were operating this deep in his territory. Bold or desperate. Either way, it was their last mistake. Headlights cut through the rain as Marco's sedan slid to a stop. Cassian lifted the woman easily, her body limp but breathing. Her face, half shadowed by her matted hair, was unfamiliar, and yet something about her refusal to die in this gutter sparked a flicker of recognition. He slid into the back seat with her still in his arms. "Straight to the penthouse," he ordered. "Marcel meets us there. We don't call hospitals." Marco didn't ask why. He never did. As the car sped through Brooklyn's wet streets, Cassian pulled his phone and opened the secure line. "Trent, give me eyes on Pier 12, he said. "Now." "Already on it," Marcel Trent replied. His voice was composed, the kind of calm that came from years of cleaning blood out of carpets for a living. "You want me to assume this is Corvin?" Cassian looked down at the woman again. Her lips were split, her camera bag missing. The faint scent of diesel and salt still clung to her. "Assume nothing," he said. "But they left her with rope from the dock, and they left her alive. That's not mercy. That's theater." "Understood." The line went dead. Cassian leaned his head back against the seat, eyes closed. Memory flickered, his father's lessons, the code that ruled the Valeo empire. Control the streets, control the silence. Anything louder than silence is defiance. Someone had been screaming tonight. Someone would answer for it. By the time they reached his building in Lower Manhattan, the rain had tapered to mist. The penthouse elevator opened directly into a wall of glass overlooking the city, steel veins glowing beneath low clouds. Cassian carried her through the marble foyer and into the guest suite. The place smelled faintly of cedar and smoke, not antiseptic. He laid her on the bed and peeled back the blood-stained fabric at her wrist. The cuts were clean, not ragged. Whoever tied her new restraint techniques, military or ex-military. Marcel arrived moments later, trench coat still damp, a first aid kit in hand. He glanced once at the woman, then back at Cassian. "She's not one of ours," he said quietly. "I know. Then why bring her here?" Cassian's eyes flicked toward the city below. "Because whoever did this wanted me to find her. And if I left her there, I'd be playing their game." Marcel cleaned the wounds without another word. When he finished, he handed Cassian a file, wet at the edges, retrieved from the alley. "Dropped from her pocket," he said. Cassian opened it. Inside were printed photos, grainy shots of the docks, containers marked with the Valeo insignia. His insignia. Beneath them, a press credential, Helen Joshua, the New York Journal, a journalist. He let the folder fall to the table, every muscle in his jaw tightening. So that was it. Someone had fed her his trail, knowing she'd bite, knowing she'd get caught. She was bait. "Give me everything on the Corvin Syndicate," he said. "Luka Dravic first. He's moving shipments through my docks again." Marcel nodded. "And the girl?" Cassian looked back at the bed. Helen stirred, whispering something under her breath. His name, though she couldn't possibly know it yet. "She lives," he said. "For now. She might be the only witness who can tell me what really happened." "And if she's not just a witness?" Marcel asked. Cassian's stare hardened. "Then she'll still tell me what I need to know. One way or another." He turned toward the window, the city pulsing beneath him. Somewhere out there, Dravic's men were celebrating. Somewhere, the Corvin Syndicate believed they'd drawn blood and walked away clean. Cassian Valeo smiled, cold and dangerous. They'd made one mistake. They'd bled someone on his streets. And before dawn, he would make the whole city remember who it belonged to. Helen woke to the sound of rain against glass. For a moment, she thought she was still at the docks, trapped between shadows and shouts, her wrists burning where the rope had bitten deep. Then the world sharpened into focus. White sheets, a dimly lit room that smelled faintly of cedar and smoke. The rhythmic hum of the city far below. She tried to sit up, and pain sliced through her ribs like a blade. "Easy." The voice was low, controlled, the kind that didn't need to shout to command attention. Her eyes snapped toward the sound. A man leaned against the doorway, dark shirt open at the collar, sleeves rolled to the elbows. He wasn't what she expected. No scars, no tattoos spelling danger. Just clean precision. But his presence filled the room like a shadow that refused to leave. "You're safe," he said simply. Her throat felt raw. Where am I?" "Somewhere no one can hurt you again." He crossed the room and poured water into a glass, the motion calm, deliberate. "You've been out for hours." She took the glass, her hands trembling so badly that the rim clinked against her teeth. The water felt like fire down her throat. "I found you in Red Hook," he continued, "tied up behind a warehouse. You were lucky." Helen's stomach turned. Lucky. That wasn't the word she'd used for bleeding in the rain. "I called the cops?" she asked, though the question felt naive the moment it left her lips. His eyes lifted, sharp, assessing, the faintest curve of a smirk beneath. "No." Silence stretched between them. He wasn't a good Samaritan. She saw that now. The kind of man who moved through life like the world owed him air. The kind of man you didn't thank without meaning it. She forced her voice steady. "Who are you?" He hesitated, just a fraction of a second. "Cassian Valeo." The name landed like a gunshot. Her blood ran cold. Cassian Valeo. The name scribbled across half her notes, the ghost who ran the docks. the whisper behind every disappearance the police wouldn't touch. The man she'd been investigating. And now he was standing 10 feet away, the same man who'd pulled her out of an alley she'd been left to die in. He watched her reaction, the widening eyes, the stiffening shoulders, and a flicker of amusement touched his mouth. "You've heard of me." Helen swallowed. "Everyone's heard of you. Not everyone tries to take my picture." Her heart stopped. "How do you?" He turned, tossing something onto the bed. Her press badge, still damp from rain. "You dropped this," he said, along with a file full of photographs that looked suspiciously like my property. Helen stared at it, at the tangible evidence of her own stupidity. "I was following a lead," she said quickly. "I didn't know." "You didn't know whose territory you were trespassing on." His tone was even, but the air in the room thickened. "You didn't know those men were Corvin soldiers. You didn't know they'd use you to send a message to me." Her voice caught. "A message?" Cassian stepped closer until his shadow spilled over her. "They left you alive, so I'd find you. They wanted me angry. Congratulations, they succeeded." Helen's pulse thundered. "You think I'm working with them?" "No," he said, surprising her. "If you were, you'd be dead already." The honesty of it chilled her more than any threat. Cassian crouched beside the bed, his gaze steady, unreadable. "You're going to tell me everything you saw tonight. Every face, every symbol, every word they said." Helen shook her head. "They'll kill me if I talk." "They'll kill you anyway," he said quietly. "But I won't let them touch you again." The contradiction in his voice, the menace laced with protection, made her chest tighten. "Why?" she whispered. "You don't even know me." Cassian's eyes met hers, and for the briefest moment, something human flickered there. "Because no one bleeds on my streets without my permission." He stood, turning toward the window. Below, the city sprawled, wet, endless, indifferent. Behind him, Helen sank back against the pillow, mind spinning. Her rescuer was the monster she'd spent months chasing through headlines and half-truths. But he'd saved her life, and for reasons she couldn't explain, the thought of leaving his protection terrified her more than the night that had nearly killed her. Cassian didn't look back when he spoke again. "You want to live, Helen? Then stay quiet. Stay close. And pray I find the men who hurt you before they find you." He left the room, the door clicking shut behind him, soft, final, absolute. For a long time, she just sat there, staring at the city lights reflected in the window. Somewhere beneath that glow, blood debts were already being tallied. And Helen Joshua realized she'd just stepped into the darkest story she'd ever written. And this time, she wasn't holding the pen. The Valeo penthouse slept like the city never could, all glass and silence, too high for the noise below to reach. But Cassian Valeo wasn't sleeping. He stood before the floor-to-ceiling window, tie loosened, shirt collar open, cigarette smoke curling like ghosted thoughts around his head. The storm had moved east, leaving the skyline crisp and merciless. From up here, every light was a reminder of what he owned. And tonight, someone had dared to bleed on his streets, dared to touch what was his domain. His phone buzzed once. Marcel Trent's voice came through, calm and cold as always. "We traced the truck from Red Hook. Belonged to a shell company registered under Corvin Assets. Luka Dravik's people." Cassian's jaw tightened. "How close did they get?" "They cleared the docks 15 minutes before our sweep teams arrived. Found fresh shell casings, blood, and tire tracks. One of our guys pulled a fragment from a crate, Valeo insignia, cut clean off with a blade." Cassian flicked ash into the glass tray beside him. "They want a war." "They already started one," Marcel replied. "Question is, how loud do you want to answer?" Cassian turned from the window, crossing to the table where Helen's camera rested. It had been retrieved from the docks, cracked but intact. He picked it up carefully, thumb brushing over the smudged lens. Through the fractured glass, he could see frozen moments, proof of a story no one should have survived. "She caught them red-handed," Cassian murmured. Marcel hesitated. "You think they knew who she was?" "Doesn't matter." Cassian set the camera down. She was the bait. They wanted me angry. And now they've got what they wanted. He stubbed the cigarette out, the motion deliberate, final. Get the car ready. 30 minutes later, Cassian's black Maserati glided through Brooklyn's warehouse district, headlights slicing through mist. Marcel sat beside him, reading coordinates off a tablet. Warehouse 12, he said. Dravik's men were sighted there last week, moving crates marked for Atlantic export. Cassian's mouth curved in a humorless smile. Then we'll make it their last shipment. They stopped 2 blocks out. Cassian stepped into the night, the chill cutting clean against his skin. 2 of his men, Gabe and Silvio, were already waiting, armed and silent. Surveillance? Cassian asked. Gabe nodded toward the alley. 4 guards on the perimeter. No civilians. Interior lights active. Cassian adjusted the grip on his pistol, the weight familiar and grounding. No warnings, he said. We move quiet. We leave a message. The men nodded. They breached the warehouse from the rear, the door groaning open to reveal a forest of crates. Diesel fumes hung heavy in the air. Somewhere inside, a generator hummed. Cassian motioned with 2 fingers, split formation. He moved like a ghost between the containers, black boots silent on the concrete. From somewhere up ahead, he heard voices, 3 men talking in Russian, 1 laughing. He rounded the corner. The laughter died when they saw him. Valeo, 1 started, but the word barely left his mouth before Cassian's bullet silenced it. The others went down seconds later, precise and brutal. Cassian didn't stop moving. He kicked a rifle aside, stepped over a body, and approached the nearest crate. The Valeo insignia had been painted over with crude black lines, erased, disrespected. That was their mistake. He pried the crate open. Inside were rifles, handguns, and an envelope resting on top. He opened it. A single photo slid out. Helen Joshua, taken from a distance, probably days before her capture. Scrawled across the image in red ink were 2 words, next time. Marcel caught up to him, expression hardening. They're taunting you. Cassian's fingers curled around the photo until it crumpled. No, he said softly. They're begging. Behind him, Silvio dragged one of the wounded guards upright. This one's still breathing. Cassian crouched, the dim light catching the reflection in his eyes. Tell Dravik, he said quietly. He just declared war in my city. The man spat blood, defiant even through the pain. Dravik says you've forgotten who made you powerful. You'll bleed like anyone else. Cassian smiled faintly. Then he should have made sure I was dead before sending a message. The guard's defiance faltered when Cassian pressed the barrel of his gun against the man's forehead. You left her alive, Cassian said. What? The guard swallowed. Dravik said to leave her. Said you'd find her. Said. Said what? Said you wouldn't be able to look away. Cassian's hand steadied, but his pulse spiked. He didn't need to pull the trigger to know the truth. Dravik was right. He hadn't looked away. A single shot echoed through the warehouse, followed by silence. Cassian stood. Burn it all, he said. Every crate, every trace. I want Dravik to smell the smoke from across the river. As his men moved, flames began to lick the edges of the crates. The air grew thick with heat and gunpowder. Cassian watched until the fire roared high enough to light the night sky, a silent declaration of ownership. When he finally turned back toward the car, his phone buzzed. Marcel again. Sir, Marcel said carefully. The girl's awake. She's asking for you. Cassian's gaze flicked to the burning warehouse. Then she'll have her answers, he said. He slid into the car, the city reflected in the flames behind him. Somewhere in that heat and smoke, the lines between protector and predator blurred completely. And as he drove back into Manhattan, one thought stayed with him. Luka Dravik had played the first move. Cassian Valeo would make the last. Helen woke again to darkness, this time softer, warmer, the kind that smelled faintly of smoke and rain-soaked leather. The bandages at her wrists tugged when she moved, and her ribs still ached, but the ache was quieter now. Controlled. She wasn't in a hospital. She knew that before her eyes even opened. Hospitals didn't have silk sheets or the low hum of jazz floating from another room. She pushed herself upright, the sheets falling around her legs. The skyline outside the window bled silver light into the penthouse, carving shapes out of the darkness. The glint of whiskey on crystal, the shimmer of black marble floors. Then she saw him. Cassian Valeo sat in an armchair near the window, jacket off, shirt sleeves rolled up, a tumbler of amber liquid in his hand. He looked like he hadn't slept in days, but men like him probably didn't need to. "You should be resting," he said, voice quiet but carrying the kind of authority that didn't need volume. Helen's throat felt raw. "I've done enough resting." He arched an eyebrow, the faintest trace of amusement ghosting his face. "You're not exactly in a position to argue." "Then why am I here?" she asked. "You could have left me in that alley." Cassian leaned forward, setting the glass down. "Because leaving you there would have meant letting Dravik win." "Dravik," she repeated, the name heavy on her tongue. "That's who they were." He nodded once. "Corvin's syndicate. They've been pushing into my docks for months. Tonight they made it personal." Helen hesitated. "You keep saying your docks. Like you own them." Cassian's eyes met hers, steady and unapologetic. "I do." The words landed like a hammer. No pretense, no denial. Just fact. "You're not denying it," she whispered. "Why should I?" he said. "You already knew who I was before you went digging." Her pulse jumped. "You went through my things." "I went through your life," Cassian corrected softly. "You've been chasing my name for 6 months. You think I wouldn't notice?" Helen swallowed hard. "I wasn't chasing you. I was chasing the truth." "And what truth was that?" He stood now, crossing the distance between them slowly, deliberately. "That the devil wears a suit and doesn't leave fingerprints." "You traffic weapons," she said. "People die because of the deals you make." He smiled faintly, but there was no warmth in it. "And who do you think keeps the rest of the city from burning?" "The police." Helen met his gaze. "You justify murder with order?" "I justify it with survival," he said. My men's, the city's. Everything runs because someone controls the chaos." "Someone like you," she said bitterly. Cassian stopped in front of her, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body. "No," he said quietly. "Someone worse. Dravik's not just moving guns. He's moving people. He's building something that doesn't stop at the docks. You saw part of it, didn't you? In that warehouse." Helen hesitated. She remembered the crates, the rifles, the blood. "You're saying it's bigger than you?" "It always is," Cassian said. "But now he's using my name to move his product. That makes it my problem." He turned toward the window again, voice low. "And now, because of you, he knows I care." The air in the room shifted. Helen frowned. "Because of me?" Cassian's gaze didn't move from the skyline. "You were supposed to be leverage, a warning, but you didn't die. That makes you valuable and dangerous. I didn't ask to be part of this. No one ever does." Silence settled between them, heavy and charged. Then Helen spoke, her voice softer. "What happens now?" Cassian turned back to her. His expression had changed. Less steel, more calculation. "You're staying here. You'll be protected until I decide how to deal with Dravik. And if I say no," his eyes hardened, "then I'll have to protect you from yourself." Something in her chest twisted. Anger, fear, something in between. "You can't just keep me here." Cassian's tone dropped to a whisper. "You think I don't know that? You think I wanted this?" He stepped closer again, his voice tightening with something almost like frustration. "Do you know what it means that they touched you? They crossed the line that doesn't get crossed. If I let you walk out that door now, you'll be dead before sunrise. Dravik will make sure of it." Helen's defiance faltered. "So what? I'm your hostage." "No," he said, his voice softening. "You're my responsibility now." For a moment, neither spoke. The city lights bled across the room like liquid gold, pooling between them. Finally, Helen broke the silence. "You really believe you're saving me?" Cassian's jaw tightened. "I believe I don't want to find you bleeding in another alley." Something in the way he said it, quiet, almost pained, made Helen's breath hitch. He turned away before she could reply, slipping back into the armor of command. Marcel will bring you food and clothes. Rest. Tomorrow, we start finding out who set you up. Tomorrow, Helen repeated, her voice a whisper. Cassian paused at the doorway. You wanted the truth, Helen. Careful, you're about to choke on it. He left, and for a long time, the only sound was the faint hum of the city below, the living, breathing empire of a man who ruled it by blood. Helen stared at the door, every instinct torn between running and staying. Because for the first time in her life, the line between fear and fascination had vanished. And Cassian Valeo, her monster, her savior, was standing right in the middle of it. Morning crawled into the penthouse like it was afraid to touch the place. The sky over Manhattan was pale steel, the kind of light that made the city look colder than it was. Helen stood barefoot beside the window, her reflection a ghost against the glass. The bruises along her throat had turned the color of deep wine, and the cuts on her wrists itched under fresh bandages. Below, the city pulsed, indifferent, alive. It went on as if she hadn't almost died 2 nights ago. The world didn't stop for anyone, not even for the people who bled in its corners. She pressed a hand against the glass and watched the fog move across the rooftops. Somewhere beneath that fog were the docks, the last place she'd seen the sky before it went black. Behind her, the soft click of footsteps. Morning, Miss Joshua, came a calm voice. She turned. Marcel Trent, Cassian's right hand, stood in the doorway, a breakfast tray balanced perfectly in his grip. Everything about him was clean, deliberate, and practiced. He wore a suit like armor. I don't usually eat with an audience, she said dryly. Then you'll forgive me for ignoring custom, Marcel replied, setting the tray on the table. Coffee, eggs, sliced fruit, silver utensils that gleamed like they'd never been used. The boss insists you eat. He has meetings. The boss, Helen repeated. Does he ever use his name around here? Marcel's mouth twitched, almost a smile. You'd be surprised how many people prefer not to say it out loud. He turned to leave, but Helen's voice stopped him. Marcel, how long have you worked for him? He paused, considering. Long enough to know when he's about to lose control of something that matters. And what exactly do I matter to him? Marcel didn't answer. He just inclined his head slightly, respectful, evasive, and left the room. Helen exhaled slowly. The penthouse felt even quieter after he was gone. By afternoon, she'd explored the entire upper floor. The space was as much a fortress as a home. Walls of bulletproof glass, discreet cameras tucked into corners, rooms that looked lived and yet somehow untouched. In one of the smaller rooms, a study lined with shelves of leather-bound books, she found a picture frame turned face down. Curiosity got the better of her. She lifted it. The photograph showed a younger Cassian standing beside a woman with dark curls and eyes that smiled. Her hand rested on his chest. His arm was around her shoulders in a gesture that was shockingly tender. The date at the corner read 2018. Helen frowned. That was 6 years ago. Before she could think too long about it, she heard the low murmur of voices downstairs, male, terse. Cassian's among them. She followed the sound, careful to stay behind the marble pillar at the landing. We found 2 more bodies near Pier 10, a voice was saying. It was Gabe, one of Cassian's men. Both Corvin. One had Dravik's tattoo. Cassian's tone was colder than she'd ever heard it. Good. Let them keep finding bodies until he remembers his place. And the girl? Marcel asked. She stays here, Cassian said. For now. She's been asking questions. I expect she will. A pause. Just make sure she doesn't start finding answers I'm not ready to give her. The words made Helen's stomach tighten. When Cassian finally appeared at the top of the stairs, his gaze landed on her instantly, like he'd known she was there all along. Eavesdropping, Helen? She straightened, heat rising to her face. You're not exactly subtle when you talk about me like I'm a hostage. You're not a hostage, he said evenly. You're alive. That's not the same thing. His expression didn't change. No, he said softly. It's not. They ended up in the study that evening, silence sitting between them like another presence. Cassian stood near the desk, his hands in his pockets, eyes shadowed. Helen finally spoke. Who was the woman in the photo? Something flickered behind his eyes. You've been exploring. I've been trapped. That's different. He didn't answer right away. When he did, his voice was quieter than she expected. Her name was Lila. She thought she could fix me. What happened? She learned monsters don't change, he said. She left before I could prove her wrong. The honesty in his tone startled her more than anger would have. For the first time, she saw a crack in the armor, a human fracture beneath the myth. Helen looked at him for a long time. You talk like you don't want to be who you are. I don't have that luxury, he said. You always have a choice. He met her eyes then, and she wished he hadn't. Because whatever she saw, there wasn't cruelty. It was exhaustion. A man who'd carried too much for too long, and had long ago stopped believing there was any way out. Cassian took a step closer, the air tightening between them. You should be careful, Helen, he murmured. The deeper you look, the less you'll like what you find. Maybe, she said, her voice barely a whisper. But I'm already in too deep to stop. For a heartbeat, it felt like the city itself had gone still. Then Cassian smiled, slow, dangerous, unreadable. Then welcome to my kingdom, he said. It's built on lies, but at least they're mine. He turned and walked out, leaving her alone with the echo of his words, and the dawning truth that every secret she uncovered only bound her tighter to him. Because in Cassian Valeo's world, truth wasn't freedom. It was currency, and Helen Joshua had just become priceless. The city never really slept. It only changed its rhythm. At night, the Valeo penthouse pulsed with a different kind of heartbeat. The hum of the elevator shaft, the low growl of engines on the street below, the occasional crackle of Cassian's voice behind a closed door, calm and lethal, as he gave orders that made men disappear. Helen couldn't sleep. She sat at the edge of the guest room bed, legs pulled to her chest, the skyline painting fractured light across her face. Each day blurred into the next. Food delivered, silence kept, the weight of her own questions growing heavier. She told herself she was still here because of fear. But fear didn't make her linger near doorways, listening for the sound of his voice. Fear didn't make her heart quicken when she heard his footsteps in the hall. Something darker did. That night, the quiet broke. The sharp crack of breaking glass echoed through the hallway, followed by a muffled shout. Helen jumped to her feet, heart racing. The sound came from the room across the hall, Cassian's study. She opened the door before she could talk herself out of it. Cassian stood by the window, one hand bleeding from a gash across his knuckles, shards of a whiskey glass glittering at his feet. The city's glow carved harsh lines across his face. Fury, control, something close to grief. Don't, he warned when she stepped closer. His voice was rough like gravel ground under boot. You shouldn't see this. I already have, she said softly. You found me bleeding, remember? He turned then, eyes blazing with the kind of emotion that made people look away, but Helen didn't. Dravik's still moving shipments, he said. Through the East River now. My men found another warehouse full of weapons branded with my insignia. He's using my empire to build his own. Then call the police, Helen said. He laughed, the sound sharp and humorless. The police are on his payroll. They always have been. You really think they'd arrest the man who signs their paychecks? Helen hesitated. Then what are you going to do? Cassian looked down at his bleeding hand, flexed it once, then twice. Why do best? He crossed to the bar, tore a towel from the counter, and wrapped it around his knuckles. The motion was steady, efficient, almost ritualistic. You talk about survival like it's something noble, Helen said. But all I see is a man trying to justify violence. And all I see, Cassian said, looking up at her, is a woman who still doesn't understand what kind of world she's standing in. Helen met his gaze. Then show me. The words were out before she could stop them. Cassian's expression changed. Not anger, not surprise, but something deeper. He stepped closer, slow, deliberate, until she could feel the heat radiating from him. "Careful, Helen," he murmured. "You're not ready for what that means. Try me." Silence stretched between them. Then he reached out, his hand hovering just inches from her cheek. His fingers brushed lightly against her jaw, not a touch of comfort, but of testing. "You think I don't see it?" he said quietly. "The way you look at me, like you're trying to find the man under the monster." Her breath caught. "Is there one?" Cassian smiled, though his eyes didn't. "Once. A long time ago." He turned away, heading for the window again. "You shouldn't be here when I'm like this." "Like what?" "Human." The word landed between them like a confession. Helen moved closer, drawn by something she couldn't name. She stood behind him, close enough to see the reflection of her own face in the glass, pale, fragile beside his silhouette. "You can't keep saving me and pretending you don't care," she whispered. Cassian's hand gripped the edge of the window frame. "And you can't keep asking questions you're not ready to live with." "Then stop lying to both of us," she said. "You don't want to protect me. You want to keep me." He turned sharply, eyes dark and dangerous now. "Is that what you think?" "It's what I know." They stared at each other, the air between them burning with all the things neither could say. Then, without warning, Cassian reached out, his hand threading through her hair, pulling her just close enough that she could feel his breath ghost against her lips. "I told you once," he murmured, voice low. "No one bleeds on my streets without my permission." "And me," she whispered. "What am I to you, Cassian?" He hesitated, a mistake I can't stop making. For a heartbeat, it didn't move. Then he stepped back, the mask sliding over his features again. "Get some rest," he said quietly. "Tomorrow, things get worse." He left the room before she could answer, the scent of whiskey and danger lingering in the air. Helen pressed a hand to her chest, trying to steady the rhythm that no longer belonged entirely to her. Because whatever fire had started between them tonight wasn't just attraction. It was combustion. And if she wasn't careful, it would burn them both alive. Rain again. It always seemed to follow Cassian Valeo, as if the city itself wept for what he was about to do. The storm had rolled in by the time he stepped out of the car, black coat snapping in the wind. Behind him, two SUVs idled near the edge of the East River docks, headlights off. The men who followed him, Gabe, Silvio, and four more, moved with quiet precision, each one armed, each one waiting for his signal. Across the water, the Corvin Syndicate's warehouse burned dim lights through the fog. Luka Dravik's flag, his arrogance, his last stronghold. Cassian pulled back his sleeve, checked his watch. 11:48 p.m., right on schedule. He'd given the order hours earlier. No survivors. Marcel's voice crackled through the earpiece. Security patterns confirmed. Dravik's inside, 3rd floor, southwest corner. Bodyguards, maybe 6. Cassian's lips curved, but there was no humor in it. "Then he's mine." He motioned forward. The men moved as one, shadows slicing through the storm. In the penthouse, Helen paced. The clock on the wall mocked her, its ticking louder with every minute Cassian was gone. She told herself she didn't care where he went at night, but the lie had worn thin. Marcel had been gone too. The guards were quieter than usual, the phones ringing and going unanswered. Something was happening out there, something that felt like the city itself holding its breath. When the power flickered, Helen's heart skipped. She crossed to the window. Below, Manhattan sprawled like a glittering wound. Thunder rolled, distant but growing closer. Then her phone, Cassian's spare burner, the one he'd left her in case, buzzed. A message. No name. Just 4 words. "He won't survive this." Helen froze. The number wasn't one she recognized, but the threat in those words was clear. Dravik. Without thinking, she grabbed her jacket and bolted for the elevator. At the docks, gunfire erupted before Cassian even reached the main doors. Bullets tore through rain and darkness, splintering wood and steel. Cassian moved with ruthless efficiency. 2 shots, 2 kills, a dance he'd perfected long ago. Flank left, he barked, voice cutting through chaos. Silvio ducked behind a crate, reloading. Boss, they got armor in there. Cassian didn't slow. He slammed a fresh magazine into his pistol and strode forward, unflinching as a bullet grazed his shoulder. Pain was nothing. The anger in him was louder than pain. He burst through the doors. Inside, the air was thick with smoke and gunpowder. Men shouted in Russian. Shadows moved through flashes of muzzle light. And there, on the catwalk above, stood Luka Dravic, broad-shouldered, scarred, his smirk a challenge carved into flesh. Valeo, he roared. You came yourself. Good. I wanted to watch you die. Cassian's gun rose. You've been watching too many fairy tales. Dravic laughed. You're too late. Your city is mine now. Your empire? Already rotting. Cassian fired. Dravic ducked behind a steel column, the bullets sparking off metal. The room exploded into chaos. Below, Cassian's men traded fire with Dravic soldiers. Bodies fell. Crates shattered. The world shrank to blood and thunder. Cassian moved up the stairs 2 at a time, firing as he climbed. His shoulders screamed with pain, but he ignored it. Dravic stepped out again, rifle raised, too slow. Cassian shot first. The bullet hit Dravic's arm, spinning him sideways. Cassian closed the distance, kicking the rifle from Dravic's grasp and slamming him against the railing. Rain and smoke poured in through the shattered windows, wind howling around them. This is for Red Hook, Cassian growled. Dravic spat blood, laughing even as Cassian pressed the gun to his chest. You think killing me fixes what you are? You're still just a monster who built his throne on corpses. Cassian's voice dropped to a whisper. I can live with that. He pulled the trigger. Dravic's body crumpled to the floor. The gunshot echoed through the warehouse like a sentence passed. Outside, sirens wailed in the distance, too late to matter. Cassian stepped into the rain again, the heat of the explosion behind him painting the sky orange. The warehouse burned like an offering. Marcel approached, face streaked with smoke. It's done, he said. Corvin's finished. Cassian said nothing. His gaze was fixed on the flames. In his chest, the hollow victory burned colder than the storm around him. Then a car screeched to a stop at the edge of the pier. Helen. She stumbled out, soaked and breathless. Cassian. He turned, surprise flashing across his face before it hardened into anger. What the hell are you doing here? You weren't answering your phone. This isn't your world, he snapped, striding toward her. You don't belong here. I do now, she shouted back. You made sure of that. The firelight danced across both their faces, painting them in gold and blood. Cassian grabbed her by the shoulders, voice rough. You could have been killed. So could you, she shot back. And if you think I was going to sit in that glass cage while you burn the city down, you don't know me at all. For a moment, they just stared at each other, thunder rolling overhead, the dock ablaze behind them. Then Cassian's hands loosened. His voice fell to a whisper. You shouldn't have come. Maybe not, Helen said, tears mixing with rain. But I'm here now. The warehouse collapsed in the distance, sparks raining into the water. Cassian looked at her, the rage in his eyes replaced by something else. Exhaustion, regret, something dangerously close to hope. This war's not over, he said quietly. But maybe we still have something left worth fighting for. Helen reached for his hand. Then let's end it. Together. He didn't answer, but for the first time, he didn't pull away either. Behind them, the city burned. Before them, the night waited, and whatever came next, they would face it side by side. The war ended in fire. The docks smoldered for 2 days, the smoke curling across the skyline like the city's own ghost refusing to rest. The news called it an industrial accident. The cops called it nothing new. And Cassian Valeo, the man who had started and ended it, called it necessary. But inside the penthouse, silence reigned. Helen sat curled on the couch, a blanket draped around her shoulders. The storm outside had passed, but she still felt it in her bones. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw flashes of light and fire. Dravik's warehouse collapsing, Cassian pulling her out of the debris. The way he'd held her afterward, not like a savior, but like a man who wasn't sure what saving meant anymore. Now he stood across the room, sleeves rolled up, fresh stitches peeking from under the bandage on his forearm. He hadn't spoken much since they'd come back. The Empire was quiet, his men loyal, but the weight of it all hung over him like gravity. Finally, Helen broke the silence. "So, it's over?" Cassian looked up from the glass of whiskey he hadn't touched. "For them, yes. And for you." He didn't answer immediately. "I killed a man who deserved it," he said at last. "But every time I look at that fire, I wonder how many others burned who didn't." Helen watched him for a long time. "That's not a question most men like you would ask." "I'm not most men." "No," she said softly. "You're worse." That made him look at her, really look. For a moment, she thought she'd gone too far. Then his expression softened in that quiet, dangerous way of his. "Maybe," he said, "but you're still here." Helen set the blanket aside and stood. "You saved me, Cassian. You kept me alive when I should have been a headline. But you also destroyed everything that made you human. You think I don't see that?" He smiled faintly. "What do you see, Helen?" She stepped closer, close enough to see the faint scar along his jaw, the exhaustion hiding behind his control. A man who thinks he's the devil, because that's easier than admitting he can bleed. Cassian's breath caught, not because of the words, but because she believed them. He turned away, walked to the window where the city lights flickered across his reflection. "You don't understand what I am," he said. "I understand you better than you think." "Then you know this can't work," he said quietly. "You're light, Helen. You chase truth. I bury it. Maybe we're not opposites," she said. "Maybe we're just two people standing in the same dark, pretending we see different things." He almost laughed, almost. "You think love fixes monsters?" "No," she said, "but it makes them stop pretending they don't feel." The words lingered between them. He turned, the city behind him, his shadow long against the marble floor. "If you stay," he said, "you'll never get out. You'll be part of this world, my world. There's no halfway." Helen hesitated. The journalist in her wanted to run. The survivor in her wanted to hide. But the woman, the one who had seen him at his worst, who had seen the quiet way he'd carried her through the fire, knew the truth. "I already chose," she said, "the night you found me." Cassian's mask cracked then, just a little. He took a step toward her, then another. When his hand touched her face, it wasn't possessive or commanding or violent. It was trembling. "You shouldn't love me," he whispered. "I don't," she lied. "But I can't walk away either." He smiled, the kind of smile that looked like surrender. Outside, thunder rolled again, distant, softer this time. The kind that signaled rain, not war. Cassian's phone buzzed once. Marcel's voice came through. "It's done, boss. Dravik's network won't recover. You own everything now." Cassian didn't look away from Helen as he replied. "Then maybe it's time I stop owning anything at all." He ended the call and let the phone fall to the floor. Helen's eyes searched his. "What does that mean?" "It means," he said quietly, "I've spent my whole life keeping this city under control. Maybe it's time to learn what happens when I let go." He reached for her hand, and this time, she didn't pull away. They stood together at the window, watching the city that had both damned and saved them. Somewhere far below, the last of the dock fires hissed out in the rain. Helen rested her head against his shoulder. "What happens now?" Cassian's answer was almost a whisper. "Now, we try to live with what's left." A pause, then softer, "and maybe figure out who we are without the blood." Helen closed her eyes. "You'll always be the man who found me." "And you," he said, turning to press a kiss against her forehead, "the woman who made me want to be found." The city lights flickered, the rain began to fall again, and for the first time in a long time, Cassian Valeo didn't see a kingdom built on fear. He saw something worth saving, even if it was already on fire. The city finally slept. Smoke had cleared from the docks, and the rain had washed the blood from the streets. But some scars never fade. Cassian Valeo was never the hero of this story. He was the storm that broke everything apart so something new could grow. And Helen Joshua, she wasn't just the woman he saved. She was the one who made him remember what saving meant. Some love stories aren't about happily ever afters. They're about surviving the kind of night that changes who you are forever. Because sometimes the monster doesn't devour you. He protects you, and in his darkness, you find the light you didn't know you still had. He found her broken, and she made him whole. But every salvation comes with a price. Would you still choose love if it came dressed as danger? Where are you watching from tonight? Drop your city or country in the comments. I love seeing how far this story travels. If you felt that ending, hit subscribe and join the Mafia Soul family for more stories of dark love, power, and redemption. Every week, we dive into the kind of stories that make your heart race, where danger looks like desire and every savior hides a secret. Don't just watch. Feel. Subscribe now, turn on notifications, and be the first to see the next story, because in this world, the monsters don't sleep. They fall in love. These stories are born in the shadows and told with the heart. See you in the next video.